Good morning everyone. Tara, basa na muna tayo ng ating libro guys. Kapwa ko Pilipino, magbasa na tayo ng ating history book of the Filipino people by Agoncillo and Guerrero. Today is 26 February 2023, History of the Filipino people, Part 5, The Warriors. Topic number 22, The Japanese Occupation. Nandito tayo sa paragraph, Social Conditions. Basa. Social conditions, life under the enemy occupation was most trying and dangerous. The men of the cities and plains had 5 mortal enemies: the Japanese military, diseases, the guerrillas, hunger, and the Japanese-paid Filipino spies. Escape in the circumstances was difficult, for the war hysteria made men unreasonable. Those who escaped unscathed could only be thankful and pray after the liberation that the Almighty had been merciful to them. When the Japanese succeeded in occupying the whole country, the enemy came Pitay military police. Began a career of wanton disregard of human lives. Houses with unregistered regios were raided and their occupants maimed and then thrown into the dungeons of Fort Santiago, where inhuman punishments were meted out to them as daily exercise. Punishments consisted of the water cure, the same technique that the early Americans introduced in the Philippines. Hanging a suspected guerrilla by the hand, then hitting him with a 4x4 piece of wood, was executed with consummate skill. Oftentimes, the Japanese soldiers made a punching bag of a prisoner's body. Worst of all, the tormentors pressed red-hot iron or electric wire into the flesh of the helpless prisoner's body. Unrecorded number of men and women died in Fort Santiago. A few of them, unable to withstand the inhuman tortures they had been undergoing daily, were forced to cry out the names of the guerrillas. In this way, some resistance men and women were captured and executed by having their heads cut off with the razor blade samurai sword. In the early days of the occupation, the Japanese and the recruits under their rule raped many women. Not a few brothers or husbands died fighting the beastly soldiers in defense of their sisters or wives. Those who could not fight back took to the mountains and joined the guerrillas. Retribution was terrible, for the Filipino is vindictive. He places personal honor above life itself and will not stop until his thirst for vengeance has been satisfied. And so some of the Japanese soldiers caught in the ambush, who were probably innocent of the crimes committed by their beastly comrades in arms, paid dearly. Those who died instantly in the ambush were lucky, for the captives were tortured to death. No one during the darkest days of the occupation could sleep soundly. Everyone was waiting for the hour he would be arrested and tortured. There was no safety, there were only fears of the unknown. Nobody could be sure that he would not meet disaster in any of the streets, for the Japanese sentries strategically placed at most street corners slapped men, women, and even children for failing to bow to them. The most feared Japanese word was kura, which meant two things to the Filipinos depending upon the movement of the Japanese hand. A kura with an inward wave of the hand meant "come here," which signified disaster. A kura with an outward wave of the hand meant dismiss or scrum. Slapping was the common sight. A Filipino was slapped for not bringing his residence certificate with him. He was slapped for not bowing properly to the sentry. He was slapped for not being understood by a Japanese sentry. He was slapped for having a face the Japanese did not like. This slapping propensity of the Japanese may be common to them and may not mean much to them, but to the Filipino it is an insult. To him, slapping is a sign of condescension. He prefers to be boxed. To slap him is to say that he is inferior as a man. Only women in his estimation are slapped. And so the Japanese military, who did not make any attempt to study Filipino psychology, failed to win the confidence and sympathy of the Filipinos. It is true, as the Japanese themselves suspected, that Almost all Filipinos were guerrillas. Side by side with the danger of Japanese presence was the spy. One may escape the brutality of the enemy, but one was confronted with the presence of spies one did not know. In his enthusiasm over the results of a naval battle, for instance, a Filipino might whisper to another the defeat of the Japanese Navy, or he might whisper quite innocently, "The Kano are coming," in the belief that all Filipinos were pro-Americans. This bad logic sometimes resulted in the execution of the naive who gloated prematurely over the victory of the American Navy. So a prudent Filipino talked only to his close friends about the war and about the return of MacArthur. The guerrillas, on the other hand, were quick to liquidate Filipinos whom they suspected of collaboration. To the resistance men, it was enough that one succumbed at the point of the bayonet to enemy promises to be considered pro-Japanese. Many guerrillas were unreasonable and unreasoning and saw only their points, not of others. Thus a guerrilla outfit laboring under a colossal misunderstanding took potshots at Jose P. Laurel and critically wounded him. Other outfits ordered the liquidation of men they did not like in the name of freedom and democracy. The Filipinos in the cities and plains therefore feared the guerrillas as much as they feared the Kimpitoy, and yet without those who stayed in the cities and towns, the guerrillas would have had a bad time making both ends meet, for even those who engaged in the buy and sell business contributed heavily directly or indirectly to the coffers of the guerrilla outfits. Owing to the economic dislocation and the scarcity of food, thousands died malaria, malnutrition, tuberculosis, and other diseases. Medicine too was scarce. Sulfadiazole, the wonder drug of the period, commanded an impossible price. Ano yung sulfadiazole na gamot? In the streets could be seen men, women, and children suffering from either extreme hunger or tropical ulcer with hundreds of flies feasting on the large fresh wounds. Men, women, and children, their faces deathly white and their lips parts scrounged. The garbage cans in the public markets and in the streets to salvage anything that could take the place of food. Many died on the sidewalks, their identity unknown. Hundreds were executed by the Japanese for stealing food or anything that could be. Ayan guys, grabe, mag-steal ka lang ng food, bibitayin ka na. Hundreds were executed by the Japanese for stealing food or anything that could be sold in buy and sell mart. To the hungry and the desperate, only courage remained. It took a great deal of physical courage to steal from the Japanese, knowing as they did that death was the recompense for such an attempt. Many took the chances and some escaped the enemy. Others were less fortunate and died heroically in the desire to make their families less hungry and destitute. Such a condition naturally produced social derelicts, crimes against person, the property multiplied. Burglary and hold-ups were common occurrences. The law enforcement agencies were helpless not only because the agents of the law had no weapons with which to frighten burglars and other criminals into submission, but also because they understood the temper of the period. They themselves were hungry, and were they not agents of the law, they would probably have turned to the highway to rob and in the emergency to kill in order to survive in a highly competitive and hostile surrounding. All was not bleak, however. There was, to be sure, light and music. There were nightclubs and restaurants where the new bourgeoisie and plutocrats spent their waking hours plotting new business ventures or planning a business co-op. There were two or planning a business co-op. There were two stage presentations consisting mainly of slapstick comedies in which some courageous actors ridiculed the Japanese soldiers. One who played the role of a Japanese sentry decorated his 2 arms with genuine wristwatches. Ulitin ko guys. One who played the role of a Japanese sentry decorated his 2 arms with genuine wristwatches, an acidic commentary on the Japanese military who forcibly confiscated wristwatches and wore them on both arms. That courageous actor did not stay long on the stage. He was promptly arrested and tortured in Fort Santiago. But he gave the people at least a few minutes of genuine laughter. From the social and economic points of view, the Japanese occupation resulted first in the rise of a new bourgeoisie whose antecedents were but dimly outlined. They were the men who, though not exactly well-bred and raw courage and imagination in business, and were reckless enough to deal with both the Japanese and the Filipinos. Second, the rise of this new bourgeoisie led to the breakdown of the old social elite class. Heretofore, the social elites came from the old, respectable, and wealthy land-owning families. With the enemy occupation, these elites no longer held the monopoly of the social circle. It was broken by the rushing in of the new rich. The result was democratization of the old stiff upper-class society. Lastly, the pyramid of Filipino society widened at the base, for more people descended to the depths and became the social problems of the post-war era. No doubt the grim experience of the war years wherein society became a wilderness, ruled by the law of the jungle, made most men ruthless and materialistic. They would not want to be the victims one more of conditions and situations that would make them helpless pawns in the social struggle. Hence the intensification of graft and corruption, which began with the distribution of relief goods during the first post-war year, and was ramified into the diverse sources of easy money, such as the disposition of the equipment and materials left in the Philippines after the war by the American Armed Forces. Bukas na itong cultural aspects. Bye everyone. God bless.